Do you know the feeling of being a stain on a priceless tablecloth? Standing before 80 guests reeking of old money, my sister's billionaire fiancé chose an ancient foreign tongue to reduce me to a servant. He expected me to crumble in silence while they laughed, but he did not know I had lived inside those words for years. When I finally replied, the laughter died instantly. My name is Leah Davis, and up until 20 minutes ago, my existence was designed to be as unobtrusive as a watermark on a sheet of bond paper. I am 32 years old, and I have spent the last decade perfecting the art of blending into the beige paint of rented walls. But standing here now, in the center of the Obsidian Club in Chicago, surrounded by the kind of wealth that does not need to shout because it simply is, I realize that invisibility is a privilege that can be revoked at the whim of a man with a 9-figure net worth. The air in the room smelled of lilies, beeswax, and the specific, metallic scent of chilled vintage champagne. It was an engagement party, arguably the social event of the season for a specific slice of Chicago society, the slice that held board meetings in Aspen and considered taxes a theoretical concept. My sister, Sienna, was the bride-to-be. She looked like a porcelain doll that had been polished until it was terrified of cracking, and Damien Vale, her billionaire fiancé, stood across the room, radiating the kind of casual power that made the air conditioning feel colder whenever he moved. He had been watching me for the last 10 minutes, not with interest, and certainly not with affection. He looked at me the way an interior designer looks at a cheap plastic chair that someone has inexplicably placed in the middle of a Baroque ballroom. I was a disruption to his aesthetic. I was the poor relation, the freelance translator with the off-rack dress and the sensible heels, standing near the velvet drapes because I did not know what to do with my hands. Then, he walked over. The room did not go silent immediately, but the conversation thinned out, like radio static clearing up. People sensed movement. They sensed a shark entering the shallows. Damien stopped 3 feet in front of me. He was handsome in a way that felt predatory, sharp jaw, eyes the color of steel wool, and a smile that did not reach those eyes. He held a crystal flute of champagne in one hand, tilting it slightly so the liquid threatened to spill. He looked me up and down, a slow, deliberate inventory of my flaws. Then, loud enough for the table of Nordic investors behind us to hear, but quiet enough to seem intimate, he spoke. He did not speak English. He did not speak Spanish or French or any of the polite, boarding school tongues these people traded like currency. He spoke in Old Icelandic. It was the archaic register, the heavy guttural tongue of the 13th century law speakers and the vendetta sagas. It was a language dead to everyone in this room except the scholars and the very, very old heritage families. "Stand here no longer like a beggar," he said, the ancient syllables rolling off his tongue with practiced arrogance. "Go to the kitchens and fetch more wine for the guests, servant." He used an archaic term for a slave. The silence that followed was absolute. To the 80 guests watching, it looked like a sophisticated, incomprehensible joke. They saw Damien Vale saying something exotic to his future sister-in-law. They saw me freeze. They expected me to flush red, to stammer, to look confused. They expected the poor, uncultured sister to bow her head in the face of his intellectual superiority. Damien smiled, a small, tight expression of victory. He was banking on my ignorance. He was banking on the fact that I was just Leah, the quiet freelancer who barely made rent. He thought I would stand there, humiliated by sounds I could not understand, forced to smile and nod like a confused child while the room laughed at my expense. I let the silence stretch. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3. I did not look down. I did not shift my weight. I looked him directly in the eyes. I saw the confidence there, the absolute certainty that he was the smartest person in the room. And then I dismantled him. I took a half step forward, invading his personal space just enough to be unsettling. When I opened my mouth, I did not speak English. I replied in Icelandic, not the clumsy, rehearsed phrases he had clearly memorized from a textbook, but the fluid, breathing cadence of a language I had lived in. "You are mistaken, Damien," I said, my voice low but carrying a resonance that cut through the murmur of the room. And your grammar is embarrassing. I saw his left eye twitch. You use the accusative case for the command, I continued, switching effortlessly into the complex, melodic tones of modern Icelandic, but keeping the archaic vocabulary he had tried to weaponize. In the context of a request to a free woman, the laws of the Gragas manuscripts require the dative case. By using the slave term, you did not insult me. You merely proved that you learned your history from a tourist pamphlet rather than a library. I paused, letting the words hang in the freezing air. Then I finished the point. If you wish to insult me in the tongue of kings, Damien, at least have the decency to conjugate the verb correctly. A gasp rippled through the group of investors behind him. Solveig Arneson, the terrifying matriarch of the Nordic delegation, actually lowered her glass. Her eyes widened, not with shock, but with recognition. Damien froze. The smirk died on his face, replaced by a flicker of genuine panic. He looked like an actor who had forgotten his lines in the middle of a monologue. The script had changed. The prop had spoken back. For a moment, nobody breathed. The air was electric, charged with the sudden, violent shift in power. I stood there, no longer the stain on the tablecloth, but the only person in the room who was completely, terrifyingly awake. But wait, let me start from the beginning. To understand why a billionaire would try to publicly eviscerate his fiancée's sister in a language spoken by less than 400,000 people. And to understand why I was capable of replying, you have to understand who I am. And more importantly, you have to understand who Damien thinks I am. My name is Leah Davis. I am 32. I live in a studio apartment in a neighborhood that real estate agents describe as up-and-coming, and residents describe as noisy. My furniture is from IKEA, my wardrobe is functional, and my bank account usually hovers around the $3,000 mark, depending on how quickly my invoices get paid. I am a ghost, in a family that worships success. I am the cautionary tale. My mother, a woman who treats social climbing like an Olympic sport, introduces me to people with a vague wave of her hand and a murmured, "Leah is figuring things out." She does not mention that I graduated with highest honors. She does not mention that 3 years ago, I was on the verge of a breakthrough in linguistic anthropology in Reykjavik. She only mentions that I'm currently single, currently renting, and currently not Sienna. Sienna, my little sister, the golden child, the one who did everything right. Sienna is 26, beautiful in a way that stops traffic, and engaged to Damien Vale, the heir to the Vale private equity empire. On paper, it is a fairy tale. The Prince of Chicago finds the most beautiful girl in the city, sweeps her off her feet, and installs her in a penthouse that costs more than the GDP of a small island nation. But fairy tales usually end at the wedding. This was an engagement party, and already, the cracks were showing if you knew where to look. I work as a senior technical translator for Northbridge Language Lab. It is a sterile, boring name for a job that involves dissecting the most complex legal and technical documents in the world. I don't just translate words, I translate intent. I take a 400-page contract written in ambiguous legal Swedish and turn it into English that holds up in a New York courtroom. I spend my days hunting for loopholes, for hidden meanings, for the subtle shifts in phrasing that can change the ownership of a shipping lane or the liability for an oil spill. I deal in precision. I deal in the truth hidden beneath layers of jargon. And Damien Vale is nothing but jargon wrapped in an expensive suit. The invitation to the engagement party had arrived 2 weeks ago. It was heavy cardstock, cream-colored, with embossed gold lettering. The honor of your presence is requested. It felt less like an invitation and more like a summons. My mother had called me 5 times in the days leading up to it. "Wear something nice, Leah," she had hissed into the phone. "Not that gray thing you wore to Christmas. And for the love of God, don't talk about your work. Nobody wants to hear about syntax at a cocktail party. Just smile. Be happy for your sister. Don't make it about you. Don't make it about you." That was the family motto when it came to Leah Davis. I had almost didn't come, but then I received the text from Sienna. It had come at 2 in the morning, 3 days before the party. Please come. I need you there. He acts better when there are witnesses. That message had chilled me to the bone. He acts better when there are witnesses. It was the first time Sienna had admitted that the perfection was a performance. For the last 6 months, she had been distant, her voice bright and brittle on the phone, reciting lists of gifts Damien had bought her like she was reading from a catalog. But that text was a crack in the facade. So I came. I put on the navy blue dress my mother approved of. High neck, long sleeves, boring hemline. I pulled my hair back. I put on the mask of the supportive, invisible sister. When I arrived at the Obsidian Club, the first thing I noticed was the silence. Not an absence of noise, but a suppression of it. The club was located in a limestone townhouse on the Gold Coast, unmarked except for a small brass plaque. The doorman had checked my ID for a full minute, comparing my face to the photo as if he suspected I was trying to infiltrate a nuclear silo. When he finally let me in, his expression made it clear. You are tolerated, not welcome. Inside, the room was a study in aggressive luxury, dark mahogany paneling, chandeliers that dripped crystal like frozen tears, and men in tuxedos who looked like they owned the senators they donated to. My parents, Gerald and Corinne, were holding court near the fireplace. My mother looked radiant, her smile fixed in place with hairspray and sheer willpower. My father looked relieved, like a man who had finally offloaded a depreciating asset, and there was Sienna. She stood next to Damien, her hand resting on his forearm. She was wearing a dress that must have cost $50,000, a shimmering column of silver silk. She looked breathtaking, but when I got closer, I saw the tension in her neck. I saw the way her fingers were gripping Damien's sleeve. Not in affection, but in desperation. She looked like a person standing on a ledge, afraid to look down. When our eyes met, she didn't smile. She just blinked, a slow, heavy movement, and mouthed 2 words. Be careful. Be careful of what? I didn't have to wait long to find out. Damien Vale didn't just want a wife. He wanted an audience. And he didn't just want a sister-in-law. He wanted a foil. He needed someone to be small so he could look even bigger. I had spent the first hour of the party dodging conversations. I stood near the edges, watching the dynamics of the room. It was a masterclass in power. I saw how Damien moved people around like chess pieces. He would touch a man on the shoulder, and that man would straighten up, beaming at the benediction. He would glance away from a woman speaking to him, and she would falter, trailing off into silence. He was controlling the room's oxygen. And then he saw me. I was standing near a pillar, holding a glass of sparkling water, trying to calculate how soon I could leave without causing a scene. Damien whispered something to Sienna. She looked up at him, her eyes wide with alarm. She shook her head slightly, a tiny pleading motion. He ignored her. He patted her hand, a gesture that looked comforting but was actually restraining, and began to walk toward me. That was when I knew. This wasn't a casual greeting. This was a targeted strike. Why? Why me? I was nobody. I had no money, no influence, no power. Why would a billionaire waste his time trying to humiliate his fiancée's freelance translator sister? As he crossed the room, the answer clicked into place, born of years of translating subtext. He hated me because I was the only part of Sienna's life he hadn't purchased. He had bought her parents' approval with debt relief. He had bought Sienna's compliance with luxury and fear. But I was the outlier. I was the one who remembered Sienna before the diamonds. I was the witness to the before, and that made me dangerous. To own her completely, he had to break her connection to the past. He had to prove to her, and to everyone else, that her family was nothing but dirt beneath his handcrafted Italian shoes. He chose language as his weapon because he thought it was his territory. He thought intellect was something you could buy, like a yacht or a senator. He assumed that because I was poor, I must be uneducated. He assumed that because I was quiet, I was empty. He reached me. The smell of his cologne, sandalwood, and cold cash washed over me. "Leah," he said, his voice smooth, English for now. "So glad you could make it. You look comfortable." "Damien," I replied, keeping my face neutral. "Congratulations," he smirked. "Thank you. It is a rare night. We have some distinguished guests from Reykjavik here tonight. The Arneson Group." He gestured vaguely to the table behind him. "I have been brushing up on my history. Fascinating culture. Brutal, but effective." "I'm sure," I said. "You studied there, didn't you?" he asked, though he clearly knew the answer. "For a semester? Before you came back?" He made coming back sound like a failure, like a retreat. "I lived there for 2 years," I corrected softly. "Right." He waved a hand dismissively. "Well, I thought I would offer you a little taste of the old country, a little authentic experience." That was when his eyes went cold. That was when he switched to the guttural, grinding sounds of old Icelandic. That was when he decided to turn me into a prop for his amusement. Stand here no longer like a beggar. He thought he was being clever. He thought he was speaking in a code that only the elite scholars, and apparently he, could understand. He thought I was a golden retriever who would just wag its tail at the sound of a human voice, oblivious to the fact that I was being told to heel. But he had made a fatal error. He didn't know about the nights I spent in the archives of the Arne Magnusson Institute. He didn't know that my unfinished thesis was on the shifting semantics of servitude in 13th century Scandinavian law. He didn't know that the language lab I worked for wasn't a tutoring center, but a crisis management firm for linguistic disasters in international contracts. He looked at me, waiting for the confusion, waiting for the fear. I looked back at him, and for the first time in 10 years, I didn't feel like a ghost. I felt like a judge. The room was still frozen from my correction. The silence was ringing in my ears. I could see my mother's face, a mask of absolute horror. She didn't know what I had said, but she knew I had spoken back. She knew I had broken the script. Damien was staring at me, his mouth slightly open. The arrogance was cracking, revealing the insecure bully beneath. He opened his mouth to speak, to try and salvage the moment, to spin it back into a joke, but I wasn't done. "And Damien," I added, switching back to English, my voice calm, level, and deadly clear. "The next time you want to order a woman to fetch you a drink in a dead language, make sure she hasn't spent the last 5 years translating the very legal texts you are trying to quote. It saves everyone a lot of time." I didn't smile. I didn't have to. The silence in the room wasn't awkward anymore. It was respectful. But I knew this wasn't the end. I saw the look in his eyes shift from embarrassment to pure, unadulterated rage. I had just humiliated a narcissist in front of the people he needed to impress. I had just lit a match in a room full of gasoline. The war had started. And as I looked at Sienna, who was staring at me with a mixture of terror and awe, I realized something else. I wasn't just fighting for my dignity, I was fighting for her life. The Uber pulled up to the curb, a gray sedan that looked hopelessly utilitarian next to the line of Bentleys and blacked-out SUVs idling in the valet lane. The driver, a kind man who had spent the 20-minute ride talking about his granddaughter's soccer game, glanced out the window and hesitated. "Is this the place, miss?" he asked. "There is no sign." "This is it," I said, unbuckling my seatbelt. "Thank you." The Obsidian Club did not need a sign. In Chicago, if you had to ask where a place was, you did not belong there. It occupied a limestone townhouse that took up half a city block, presenting a facade of heavy, windowless masonry to the street. The entrance was a single, imposing door made of dark oak, flanked by gas lanterns that flickered with a deliberate, archaic charm. I stepped out onto the sidewalk, the cold wind off the lake whipping at the hem of my navy dress. I smoothed it down, clutched my bag tighter, and approached the door. There was no handle. There was only a man. He was standing on a small heated mat, dressed in a suit that cost more than my car. He held a tablet in one hand and possessed the kind of facial expression usually reserved for bomb disposal experts. As I approached, he did not smile. He did not offer a greeting. He simply lowered his eyes to my shoes, then traveled up to my face, performing a silent, brutal audit of my net worth. "Name," he said. It wasn't a question. It was a command to justify my presence. "Leah Davis," I said. He tapped the screen of his tablet. He scrolled. He stopped. Then he scrolled again. He let the silence stretch out, leaving me standing in the wind while the couple behind me, a woman in mink and a man who smelled of cigars, sighed impatiently. "ID," he said, finally looking up. I blinked. "Excuse me?" "Identification," he repeated. "We have a strict guest list." I could feel the heat rising in my cheeks. The couple behind me had not been asked for ID. The group of laughing men who had entered before me had not been asked for ID. I was the only one being stopped at the border. I fumbled with my clutch, my fingers stiff from the cold, and retrieved my driver's license. He took it. He held it up to the lantern light, tilting it back and forth as if checking for a watermark. He looked at the photo, then at me, then back at the photo. "Davis," he muttered, as if the name itself was a clerical error. "Right. You are on the supplementary list." He handed the card back to me and stepped aside, just enough to allow me to squeeze past him without him having to move his feet. "Enjoy your evening," he said. The tone suggested he doubted I would. I stepped inside, and the heavy door thudded shut behind me, sealing out the wind and the noise of the city. The transition was jarring. One moment, I was on a cold Chicago sidewalk. The next, I was inside a jewel box. The interior of the Obsidian Club was designed to intimidate. The ceilings were 20 feet high, lost in shadow. The walls were paneled in mahogany so dark it looked black, absorbing the light from the crystal chandeliers. The air was warm and smelled of beeswax, expensive leather, and the heavy floral perfume of women who never had to do their own laundry. A hostess appeared from the gloom. She was tall, thin, and beautiful in a terrifyingly symmetrical way. She checked my name again on her own tablet, her eyebrows lifting slightly. "Ms. Davis," she said. "Follow me." She led me into the main ballroom. It was a sea of black ties and silk gowns. The noise level was a polite, cultured hum, the sound of million-dollar deals being discussed over canapés. I recognized faces from the business pages of the newspaper. I saw a senator. I saw a tech mogul who had recently bought an island. But the hostess did not lead me toward them. She walked past the central tables, past the prime real estate near the fireplace, and kept going. We walked until the crowd thinned out. We walked until we were at the very edge of the room, next to a set of swinging double doors that clearly led to the kitchen. "Here we are," she said, pulling out a chair at a small, round table that was partially obscured by a large potted fern. "Your server will be with you shortly." She didn't wait for a response. She turned and glided back toward the people who mattered. I sat down. The message was so clear, it might as not have been written in neon. You are allowed to be in the room, but you are not allowed to be part of the party. I was placed in the peripheral vision of the elite, close enough to the service entrance that every time the waiters came out with trays of hors d'oeuvres, I would catch a blast of kitchen air and the sound of clattering dishes. I took a sip of water from the crystal glass in front of me and decided to survey the battlefield. From my vantage point, I had a clear view of the court. In the center of the room, standing on a slightly raised area of the rug that functioned as an unspoken throne room, were the Vales. Gerald Vale, Damien's father, looked like a man who had been carved out of granite and then dressed by a Savile Row tailor. He was 60, silver-haired, and stood with his feet apart, occupying space as if he owned the very atoms of the air. He was laughing at something a man next to him had said. But the laugh did not reach his eyes. His eyes were scanning the room, counting heads, calculating leverage. Beside him stood Corinne Vale. She was a woman of terrifying maintenance. Her skin was smooth, tight, and pale, the result of excellent genetics and even better dermatologists. She wore a collar of diamonds that probably cost more than the apartment building I lived in. She wasn't just standing, she was posing. Every tilt of her head, every graceful gesture of her hand holding a champagne flute was calculated for maximum elegance. They looked like royalty, not the benevolent fairy tale kind, but the historical kind. The ones who beheaded dissenters and married off their children to secure borders. And then I saw Sienna. My sister was making her way through the crowd toward the Vales. She looked undeniably stunning. Her dress was a masterpiece of silver silk that clung to her frame, catching the light like liquid mercury. Her hair was swept up in an intricate chignon, exposing the long, elegant line of her neck. But I knew my sister. I knew the difference between her real smile, the one that crinkled her nose and made her eyes disappear, and the mask she was wearing now. She was rigid. She moved with a stiff, careful grace, like a person walking on a sheet of ice. Her eyes were wide and darting, checking the faces around her, checking the Vales, checking the empty space where Damien should be. She looked terrified. She spotted me in my exile by the ferns. Relief washed over her face for a split second before the mask slammed back down. She glanced around to make sure no one was watching, then hurried over to my table. "Leah," she breathed, gripping my hand. Her fingers were ice cold. "You made it." "I made it," I said, keeping my voice low. "Though your bouncer clearly thought I was here to steal the silverware." Sienna didn't laugh. She looked over her shoulder, her eyes scanning the room. "I'm sorry about the table. Damien, he did the seating chart himself. He said family should be comfortable, away from the noise." "It's fine, Sienna," I lied. "It's cozy." She squeezed my hand so hard it hurt. "Listen to me. Please, tonight has to go perfectly. Damien he is in a mood. The deal with the Nordic group, the Arneson account, it's hanging by a thread. He's very particular right now. If anything goes wrong, if anyone embarrasses him." She trailed off, her eyes filling with a sudden, raw panic. "I'm not going to embarrass him," I said, trying to soothe her. "I'm just here to drink the free water and clap when required." "Just don't be you," she whispered, the words rushing out. "Don't debate. Don't correct people. Just be invisible. For me, please." "Sienna," I said, pulling back slightly. "Are you okay?" Before she could answer, the kitchen doors swung open behind me. A waiter hurried out, nearly bumping into our table. Sienna jumped as if a door had slammed. "I have to go," she whispered. "He's looking for me." She turned and fled back toward the center of the room, smoothing her dress as she went, composing her face back into the serenity of a billionaire's fiancé. I watched her go, a cold knot forming in my stomach. That wasn't pre-wedding jitters. That was fear. I sat there for another 10 minutes, but no server came to offer me wine. The waiter seemed to have a blind spot for table number 42. Thirsty and feeling rebellious, I stood up and walked toward the small service bar tucked away in the corner, near the kitchen entrance. As I approached, I saw 2 servers huddled together, polishing glasses. They didn't see me. "I'm telling you, he's losing it," one of them whispered. He was young, with a nervous tick in his jaw. "He fired Marcus 10 minutes ago, just walked up to him and told him to get out." "What for?" the other one asked. "Marcus is the best head waiter we have." "For pouring the wine with his left hand," the first one said. "Vale said it was visually asymmetrical. He said it ruined the line of sight. Marcus has worked here for 15 years, and Vale just erased him, over a hand." "Keep your voice down," the other hissed. "If he hears you, we're next. He is looking for reasons tonight. He wants someone to blame." I backed away, my heart thudding against my ribs. Visually asymmetrical. It was absurd. It was psychotic. I returned to my table, but the atmosphere in the room had shifted for me. It was no longer a party. It was a minefield. I looked at the guests laughing and drinking, and I realized they were all performing. They were all terrified of making a mistake, of holding a glass with the wrong hand, of saying the wrong thing. Damien Vale wasn't hosting a celebration. He was conducting a stress test. Suddenly, a hush fell over the entrance area. The crowd parted, rippling outward like water disturbed by a stone. A new group of guests had arrived. There were 6 of them, moving in a tight formation. They stood out instantly against the backdrop of American excess. They were dressed simply, almost starkly. No sequins, no loud jewelry. The men wore dark, perfectly cut suits without ties. But it was the woman at the center who commanded the silence. She was in her late 50s, perhaps 60. She had steel-gray hair cut in a sharp, asymmetrical bob that framed a face made of angles and intelligence. She wore a charcoal pantsuit that looked like armor, and her only jewelry was a heavy silver brooch on her lapel, a stylized depiction of a Viking ship. This had to be Solveig Arnesen, the head of the Arnesen Group, the woman holding the checkbook that Damien was desperate to open. She did not smile. She did not wave. She walked into the room with the easy, terrifying confidence of a woman who answers to no one. Gerald and Corinne Vale practically tripped over themselves to greet her, their smiles widening, their postures becoming deferential. Damien appeared at her side instantly, looking like a sleek, eager wolf. I watched them from my fern-obscured exile. I saw Damien gesturing, talking rapidly, using his hands. I saw Solveig listening. She didn't nod. She didn't offer polite affirmations. She just watched him, her expression unreadable. Then, something strange happened. Solveig turned her head. She looked away from Damien, away from the Vales, and scanned the room. Her gaze was methodical, sweeping over the crowd like a searchlight. It passed over the senator. It passed over the tech mogul. It passed over the models and the socialites. And then, it stopped on me. I was 60 feet away, sitting in the shadows near the kitchen door, wearing a dress meant to make me invisible. But Solveig Arnesen stopped. Her eyes, blue and piercing even from this distance, locked onto mine. She didn't look away. It wasn't the dismissive glance of the doorman. It wasn't the pitying look of my sister. It was a look of assessment. She tilted her head slightly to the side, narrowing her eyes. It was the look a predator gives when it spots another predator in the tall grass. Why was she looking at me? Did she know who I was? Impossible. I was a freelancer. I was a nobody. Unless she knew the Northbridge Language Lab. Unless she had read the Arctic Clarity Framework. My heart hammered in my throat. I held her gaze, refusing to look down. For 5 long seconds. We were the only 2 people in the room connected by a wire of tension. Then, Damien stepped into her line of sight, blocking me. He said something that made the people around him laugh. Trying to draw her attention back to him, Solveig turned back to him slowly, but I saw the shift in her posture. She was no longer just listening. She was waiting. And I realized then, with a jolt of clarity, that the map of power in this room was not as simple as Damien thought. He believed he was the king on the board. He believed he controlled the game. But Solveig Arnesen had just looked at the pawn in the corner, and for the first time all night, she looked interested. The atmosphere in the room shifted the moment the music stopped. It was not a gradual fade, but a sudden, sharp cut, as if a conductor had snapped a baton. The heavy oak doors at the top of the grand staircase swung open, and Damien Vale appeared. He did not just walk down the stairs, he descended. It was a movement practiced in front of mirrors, calculated to maximize the impact of his silhouette against the backlighting of the upper hallway. He paused on the landing, one hand resting casually on the mahogany banister, surveying the room below. The silence that swept across the 80 guests was instantaneous. It was Pavlovian. The alpha had arrived, and the pack knew that noise was a challenge. I watched him from my table in the shadows. From this distance, he looked flawless. His tuxedo was cut so sharply it seemed to defy physics, and his hair was swept back in a style that suggested both rigorous control and casual indifference. But I wasn't looking at his clothes. I was looking at his eyes. They were not sweeping the room with warmth or gratitude. They were doing a head count. He was checking his inventory. He began to move down the stairs, his steps slow and deliberate, As he reached the floor, the crowd parted for him. It was like watching water move around a stone. He didn't acknowledge anyone directly. No nods, no handshakes. He just walked toward the center of the room, toward the spot where the light was brightest, toward the one possession he needed to display, Sienna. My sister was talking to an elderly woman, a distant cousin of our mother's who had somehow made the list. Sienna looked animated, her hands moving as she spoke, a genuine, albeit small, smile on her face. It was a flash of the old Sienna, the one who used to laugh until she hiccuped. Damien reached her. He didn't say excuse me. He didn't wait for a lull in the conversation. He simply placed his hand on the small of her back. To the casual observer, it looked like a gesture of affection, a fiancé claiming his bride. But I knew that touch. I saw the way his fingers splayed out, the thumb digging slightly into her spine, applying pressure. It was not a caress. It was a claim. It was the way a man handles a steering wheel. Sienna froze. Her smile didn't drop, but it stiffened, becoming fixed and glassy. She stopped speaking in mid-sentence. Damien leaned in, whispering something in her ear. Then, with the pressure of his hand, he physically turned her. He rotated her 45 degrees away from our cousin and toward the center of the room, effectively cutting the conversation dead without saying a word to the old woman. He positioned Sienna so that the light from the chandelier hit her diamonds, maximizing the sparkle. He had adjusted her like a floor lamp. The cousin blinked, confused, then faded back into the crowd, understanding that she had been dismissed. Sienna didn't look back at her. She looked up at Damien, her eyes wide, waiting for the next command. I felt a surge of nausea rise in my throat. This wasn't a partnership. It was a puppeteer and his marionette. Damien began to move through the room, keeping that hand firmly on Sienna's back, guiding her. He stopped to speak to the senator, then to the tech mogul. Every interaction was a power play. He would make a joke, wait for the laughter, and then move on before the other person could respond, leaving them wanting more of his approval. Then, he turned toward my corner. My stomach tightened. I picked up my water glass, using it as a shield. He walked straight up to my table, pulling Sienna along with him. Up close, the strain on my sister's face was heartbreaking. Her foundation was perfect, but she looked pale underneath it, and there was a fine tremor in the hand holding her clutch. "Leah," Damien said. His voice was warm, rich, the kind of voice that sounded like it should be narrating a documentary about winning. "I see you found your spot. It is a lovely view of the kitchen service door." "Damien," I said, unable to help myself. "Very educational," he laughed. It was a dry, hollow sound. "Always the wit. I like that about you. You know, the service is struggling tonight. Hard to get good help these days. Everyone wants to be a CEO. Nobody wants to pour the wine." He looked down at his empty glass, then at me. "Be a love, would you?" he asked. It was phrased as a question, but the inflection was absolute. "Go to the bar and get me a sparkling water, with lime, and a glass of Pinot Noir for your sister. She looks like she needs to relax." I stared at him. There were literally 10 waiters within a 30-foot radius. He could have snapped his fingers and had a fountain of champagne appear. "Damien," I said, my voice tight, "there is a waiter right behind you." "I don't trust the staff right now," he said, his smile not wavering. "I fired the captain. Chaos back there. I trust family." "You don't mind, do you? It is for Sienna." He squeezed Sienna's waist. She flinched, a microscopic movement. "Please, Leah," Sienna whispered. Her voice was thin. "Just, please." I looked at her. I saw the desperation in her eyes. If I said no, if I made a scene, he would take it out on her later. I knew that with a certainty that chilled me. "Of course," I said. I stood up. I felt the heat of humiliation burning my neck. I was a guest. I was the sister of the bride, and he was sending me to fetch drinks like a junior intern. "Good girl," Damien said. He didn't look at me as he said it. He was already looking past me, scanning the room for his next target. I walked to the bar. My hands were shaking. I ordered the drinks, waited while the bartender poured them with agonizing slowness, and walked back. When I handed Damien the glass, he didn't say thank you. He just took it and turned his back on me to greet a new arrival. I sat back down, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. "That was good," a voice whispered in my ear. I jumped. It was my mother. Corinne had materialized out of the gloom, smelling of Chanel and ambition. She pulled out the chair next to me and sat down, leaning in close. "What was good?" I asked, staring at the back of Damien's head. "That he just treated me like a waitress?" "Don't be dramatic, Leah," my mother hissed. "He included you. He asked you for a favor. That means he sees you as part of the inner circle. He trusts you. He called me a good girl, Mom, like I was a golden retriever. He is powerful," she said, as if that explained and excused everything. "Powerful men have their ways. You need to stop analyzing everything to death and just be grateful. Look at your sister. Look at where she is." I looked at Sienna. She was standing next to Damien while he lectured a group of bankers. She wasn't listening. Her eyes were glazed over, fixed on a point in the middle distance. Every time Damien laughed, she smiled automatically, a reflex disconnected from her brain. "She looks miserable," I said. "She looks secure," my mother corrected. "She looks like she will never have to worry about a mortgage payment or a medical bill for the rest of her life. Do you know what that is worth, Leah? Do you have any idea what I would have given for that?" I looked at my mother. I saw the lines of tension around her mouth, the fear that lived permanently in her eyes since my father died. "Is that what this is?" I asked quietly. "A transaction?" "Everything is a transaction," she said, standing up. "Grow up, Leah, and smile. You look like a funeral mute." She walked away, leaving me alone with the realization that my mother didn't just approve of the cage. She had helped weld the bars. 10 minutes later, I saw Sienna break. It was subtle. Damien was deep in conversation with Solveig Arneson. He had taken his hand off Sienna's back for the first time in an hour to gesture at something. Sienna took a half step back, then another. She looked around, her eyes wild, like an animal looking for an exit. Then she turned and walked quickly toward the hallway that led to the restrooms. I waited 5 seconds, then followed her. The ladies' room at the Obsidian Club was larger than my entire apartment. It was a sanctuary of pink marble, gold faucets, and velvet settees. When I walked in, it was empty, except for Sienna. She was standing at the sinks, gripping the edge of the marble counter so hard her knuckles were white. Her head was bowed, her breathing coming in short, ragged gasps. "Sienna," I said softly. She spun around. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but there were no tears. She looked terrified to see me. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her voice shaking. "He notices when people are gone. If we're both gone, he'll think we're talking." "We are talking," I said, walking toward her. "Sienna, look at me. You are shaking." "I'm cold," she lied. "The air conditioning is too high." "You are not cold. You are scared." I reached out to touch her arm, but she pulled away as if I were radioactive. "Stop it, Leah," she snapped. "Just stop. I don't need your psychoanalysis. I don't need you looking at me with those big, judging eyes." "I'm not judging you," I said. "I'm worried about you. I saw him out there. The way he touches you, it's not right. He treats you like property." "He loves me!" Sienna cried out. The sound bounced off the marble walls, shrill and unconvincing. "He takes care of me. He takes care of us. Do you have any idea how much stress he is under? He's merging 2 companies. He's tired. He gets particular. That's all." "Particular?" I repeated. "Sienna, he made me fetch him water to show me my place. He moved you around like furniture. That isn't stress. That is control." Sienna let out a bitter, jagged laugh. She turned back to the mirror. aggressively reapplying her lipstick, though her hand was trembling too much to stay within the lines. "You know what this is?" she said to her reflection. "This is jealousy, pure and simple." I stared at her back. "What?" "You're jealous," she said, spinning around to face me again. Her eyes were hard now, defensive. "You've always been the smart one, the scholar, and here I am, the one who barely finished college, marrying a billionaire. It kills you, doesn't it? That I won, that I'm the one who made it? This isn't a competition. Sienna," I said, feeling a dull ache in my chest. "I don't want his money. I want my sister back." "Your sister?" she scoffed. "Which sister? The one you abandoned?" The room went silent. The only sound was the dripping of a gold faucet. "I didn't abandon you," I said quietly. "Yes, you did," she accused, stepping closer. "You went off to Iceland to chase some academic fantasy. You left me here with Mom and Dad when Dad was getting sick. You were so busy with your precious dead languages that you didn't even notice the family was drowning until we called you." "I came back," I said. "The second Mom called, I dropped everything. I walked away from my thesis. I walked away from a Fulbright scholarship. Sienna, for you." "You came back because you failed," she spat. The words hit me like a physical blow. I took a step back. "What did you say?" "You heard me," Sienna said, her voice cruel with defensive panic. "Damien told me. He looked into it. He said you were struggling in Reykjavik, that your research was going nowhere, that you used Dad's death as an excuse to come home because you couldn't hack it in the real academic world. You didn't come back to save us. Leah, you came back to save face." I stood there, stunned. The air left my lungs. "Damien told you that?" I whispered. "Yes," she said. "He knows people. He checked. So don't stand here and act like a martyr. You chose to come back because you had nowhere else to go. You chose failure. And now you're mad because I chose success." She recapped her lipstick with a sharp click. "Fix your face, Leah. We have to go back out. If he asks, we were talking about hair products." She brushed past me, her silk dress rustling like dry leaves, and walked out of the bathroom. I stood alone in the pink marble silence. I looked at myself in the mirror. I looked pale, small, defeated. "He said you were struggling. He said your research was going nowhere. It was a lie, a complete, total fabrication. My research had been groundbreaking. Professor Stephenson had cried when I left. I had 3 chapters published in the leading journal of Nordic studies before I even finished the degree. Why would Damien lie about that? Why would he bother to invent a narrative about my academic failure to Sienna? And then, a colder, darker thought began to form in the back of my mind. I thought back to that phone call 3 years ago. It had been Sienna on the line. She had been hysterical. Dad is dead. Mom is in the hospital with shock. The bank is calling about the house. You have to come home. I can't do this alone. Please, Leah, come home. I had asked for a week to wrap things up. She had screamed that they didn't have a week, that if I didn't come now, everything would be lost. I had always assumed the urgency was grief. But what if it wasn't? Damien had entered the picture shortly after I returned. He had saved the house. He had handled the debts. Sienna had said Damien told her I was a failure. He had poisoned my credibility with her to ensure that even if I tried to intervene, she wouldn't listen. He had isolated her from me not just physically, but intellectually. But how long had Damien been in the picture? My mother had mentioned Damien helping with the mortgage, but Dad had only been dead for 2 days when I got the call. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. What if the debt hadn't just appeared when Dad died? What if Damien had been circling the family before that? What if the call to bring me home wasn't just a cry for help, but a requirement? Maybe he didn't just want Sienna. Maybe he needed the whole set. He needed the smart sister out of the way, clipped and caged, so she couldn't whisper in the pretty sister's ear. He needed me here, in Chicago, dependent and failing, so that my version of the truth wouldn't matter. I looked at my reflection again, The image of the failure. He is not what he seems. The text message echoed in my head. I wasn't just dealing with a controlling fiancé. I was dealing with an architect. He had built this reality brick by brick. He had rewritten my history to keep his fiancée docile. I straightened my spine. I smoothed the navy blue fabric of my dress. Sienna was wrong. I hadn't chosen failure. But standing there in the cold light of the bathroom, I realized I had been chosen for it, and I was done playing the part. I walked to the door. I was going back out there, not to serve drinks, and not to blend in. I was going back out there to watch. I needed to see the strings, and once I saw them, I was going to bring out the scissors. I walked out of the bathroom with a singular, cold purpose. The party had transformed in my eyes. It was no longer a social gathering. It was a crime scene where the evidence was still being arranged. I needed to find my mother. Corinne Vale was standing near the shrimp tower, laughing at a joke made by the wife of a circuit court judge. She held her champagne glass by the stem, her pinky finger extended, a perfect picture of the carefree matriarch. But I knew her tells. I saw the way her eyes darted to the entrance every 30 seconds. I saw the way she kept touching the diamond necklace at her throat, as if checking to make sure the collar was still there. I approached her. I didn't wait for a lull in the conversation. I stepped into the circle, nodded to the judge's wife, and put my hand on my mother's elbow. "Mom," I said, "we need to talk, now." "Leah," she said, her smile not wavering, but her voice dropping to a warning hiss. "Not now. Mrs. Henderson was just telling me about her summer in Nantucket." "Mrs. Henderson?" I said, turning to the woman. "You will have to forgive us. A minor family crisis involving a missing earring. You understand?" Mrs. Henderson nodded vaguely, and I steered my mother away before she could protest. I didn't stop until we were in a small alcove near the library entrance, shielded by a heavy velvet curtain. "Have you lost your mind?" my mother snapped, pulling her arm away. "You are acting erratic." "Damien is watching." "Let him watch," I said. "I want to know about the money. We are not discussing finances at an engagement party. We are discussing them," I corrected, my voice low and hard. "Sienna thinks I abandoned you. She thinks I stayed in Iceland because I was failing. Damien told her that. Why didn't you correct him?" My mother looked away. She took a sip of her champagne, her hand trembling slightly. "It is complicated. Leah, Damien, he has a narrative. It is easier if we all stick to it." "Easier for who?" I asked. "Mom, listen to me. 3 years ago, you told me Damien handled the debts after Dad died. You said the house was safe. You said the creditors were gone." "They are gone," she said, too quickly. "How?" I pressed. "Dad owed nearly $2 million. Damien didn't just write a check out of the goodness of his heart. Men like that don't give gifts. They make investments. So tell me, what did we sell him?" My mother looked trapped. She glanced at the curtain, then back at me. Her face seemed to crumble, the confident socialite mask dissolving into the terrified widow she had been 3 years ago. "He bought the debt," she whispered. I stared at her. "What do you mean?" "He bought it." "The bank was going to foreclose," she said, the words rushing out now. "We were going to lose the house, the cars, everything. Your father. He had leveraged everything. Damien stepped in. He offered to buy the note from the bank. He consolidated everything." "So we owe him," I said slowly. "We owe Damien the $2 million. It is handled through a holding company," she said, wringing her hands. "Harborline Holdings. It is one of his shell companies. He told us not to worry about the payments. He said as long as we are family, the debt stays dormant." "Dormant," I repeated. The word tasted like ash. I had translated enough financial contracts to know exactly what that meant. "Mom, did you sign a new agreement with Harborline Holdings?" She nodded. "Does it have a demand clause?" She blinked, looking confused. "He said it was standard language, just a formality. Does it have a demand clause? I asked again, my voice rising. Does it say the lender can demand full repayment at any time, without cause, within 30 days? My mother looked down at her shoes. Yes, but he said he would never use it. He's marrying Sienna. We are family. I felt the color drain from my face. It was worse than I thought. It wasn't just a loan. It was a trapdoor under our feet. A demand note meant that at any second, Damien could wake up, decide he didn't like the way I looked at him, and demand $2 million within 30 days. If we couldn't pay, and we definitely couldn't, he would seize the house, seize the assets, and leave my mother on the street. Sienna wasn't just a bride. She was the interest payment. As long as she stayed, as long as she smiled, as long as she played the role of the perfect, obedient wife, the debt stayed dormant. But if she tried to leave, if she tried to break free, he would pull the trigger on the debt and destroy her family. He owns us, I whispered. He literally owns us. It is not like that, my mother pleaded, though her eyes said she knew exactly what it was like. He takes care of us. Look at this party. Look at Sienna's ring. It is a leash, Mom. It is a diamond-encrusted leash. I couldn't look at her anymore. I felt sick. I turned and walked away, needing air, needing space to process the sheer scale of the trap we were in. I wandered toward the edge of the room, near a large bay window that looked out over the darkened garden. I leaned my forehead against the cold glass. My reflection looked back at me, pale, ghostly, wearing the navy blue dress of a dutiful sister. You look like you are calculating the structural integrity of the window, a voice said beside me. I turned, standing there, holding a glass of mineral water. Was Solveig Arneson, up close. She was even more formidable. Her eyes were a piercing, clear blue, surrounded by a web of fine lines that spoke of a life spent squinting at spreadsheets and glaciers. She didn't look like the other women in the room. She looked like she had been forged, not born. I was wondering if it would break if I leaned harder, I admitted. It is reinforced glass, she said calmly. Standard for these types of clubs. They like to keep the chaos inside. She took a sip of her water, watching the room. He is quite the performer, isn't he? Your future brother-in-law. I looked over at Damien. He was holding court near the bar, laughing loudly. He likes an audience, I said carefully. He likes mirrors, Solveig corrected. He likes people who reflect him back at twice the size. That is why he tries to make everyone else small. It is a simple equation. If everyone else is on their knees, he looks like a giant. I looked at her sharply. It was a bold thing to say to the bride's sister. Why are you telling me this? I asked. I'm just the unsuccessful sister, the one who needs to fetch the drinks. Solveig turned to face me fully. A small, dry smile touched her lips. I heard your accent, she said. When you corrected him, that wasn't tourist Icelandic, that was Reykjavik University dialect, and you mentioned the Gragas laws, specifically the distinction between thrall and free woman. I read a lot, I said, deflecting. I am sure you do, she said. You know, my firm is currently navigating a nightmare of a contract merger. We are trying to standardize our liability clauses across 3 jurisdictions. We are using a new set of guidelines, the Arctic Clarity Framework. My heart skipped a beat. It is a very robust framework, I said, keeping my voice neutral. It is, she agreed. Brilliant. Actually, it takes the ambiguity out of cross-border enforcement. It was developed by a team of linguists and lawyers. There was a lead researcher on the project, a ghostwriter. Really. Her name was removed from the final publication because of some bureaucratic nonsense with her university funding. But the syntax is unmistakable. She looked at me. She had a very specific way of handling double negatives in translated clauses, very precise. I stayed silent. My hands were gripping the velvet curtain next to the window. I had written the core syntax of the Arctic Clarity Framework 3 years ago, just before I left Iceland. It was my magnum opus, the work I had abandoned to come home and save my family. I thought it had been buried. lost in the academic shuffle. "You are Leah Davis," Solveig said. It wasn't a question. "I looked you up after your little display. You work for Northbridge Language Lab now." "I do. A waste," she said simply. "Like using a scalpel to butter toast." Before I could respond, a burst of laughter erupted from the center of the room. I looked over and saw Damien holding his phone up, gesturing for silence. "Excuse me," he boomed. "Important business. The life of a capitalist never sleeps." He walked away from the group, heading toward the quieter side of the room, right toward where I was standing. Though he didn't see me behind the heavy drapes, Solveig and I both stepped back into the shadows of the alcove. It wasn't intentional eavesdropping, but we were trapped. Damien stopped 10 feet away. He put the phone to his ear, his back to us. His voice dropped, losing the jovial, party host veneer. It became hard, urgent, and angry. "I don't care what the compliance officer said," he hissed into the phone. "Push it through. The Arneson deal has to close tonight. Tonight, Jerry. I need that liquidity." Pause. "Because I am over-leveraged on the tech acquisition. You idiot. If Solveig doesn't sign the letter of intent before midnight, the bank calls the loan on the marina project tomorrow morning. I need her signature to show the board we have the capital." He listened for another moment, then kicked the leg of an antique chair. "Just get the papers ready. I will get her to sign. She is old school. She is impressed by the show. I have the whole family here. The perfect picture. She will sign." He hung up and smoothed his jacket. He took a deep breath, plastered the smile back onto his face, and walked back into the party. I stood frozen, beside me. Solveig was perfectly still. "Well," she said softly, "that was illuminating." "He's broke," I whispered. "He's not just rich, he's leveraging debt against debt." "He is playing a shell game," Solveig said, her voice icy. "He needs my money to pay off the bank for another bad deal. He is using my reputation to prop up his house of cards." She looked at me. "And he is using your sister as the garnish." "He said the deal has to close tonight," I said. "He is desperate." "Desperate men are dangerous," Solveig said, "but they are also prone to errors." She reached into her small, beaded purse and pulled out a business card. She handed it to me. "I am not going to sign that letter of intent. Leah, not tonight, maybe not ever, which means his house of cards is going to start shaking very soon." "He will blame me," I said. "If you walk away, he will find a way to blame me. He will say I offended you." "Let him try," Solveig said. "I think you and I have more to discuss. But for now, watch your back. He knows you saw through his language. If he realizes you see through his finances too, he will come for you." She nodded once, a sharp, respectful gesture, and walked away, heading toward the bar with the predatory grace of a shark that has just sensed weakness in the water. I stayed in the alcove, my mind racing. The debt, Harborline Holdings, the Arneson deal, it was all connected. Damien wasn't just a bully. He was a fraud, a high-level, sophisticated fraud, but a fraud nonetheless. I needed to sit down. I found a small bench near a potted palm and sank onto it. "Don't look at me," a voice murmured. I stiffened. A woman had sat down on the other end of the bench. She was looking straight ahead, sipping a martini. It was Renee Blake. I knew her by reputation. She was the Vale family's personal counsel, not the corporate lawyers who handled the mergers, but the fixer, the one who handled the DUIs, the hush money, the messy divorces. She was 40, sharp-featured, with dark hair cut in a severe bob. She was wearing a black dress that looked like it was made of shadows. "Renee?" I asked, confused. "I said don't look at me," she said, her lips barely moving. "We are just two guests taking a break." "Okay," I said, looking forward. "What is happening?" "You rattled him," she said. Her voice was tired, stripped of the professional polish she usually wore. "The Icelandic thing. He hates being laughed at. He is going to try to regain control." "Let him try," I said. "He is going to ask for a public apology," Renee said. "During the toast, He is going to spin it so that you look like the aggressor, like you were drunk and rude to the host. He wants to force you to kneel so he can be the benevolent king who forgives you. I won't apologize. Good, Renee said. But be careful. He has leverage. He knows about your mother's debt. He will threaten to call it in right there, in a whisper, while everyone is watching. I know about Harborline Holdings, I said. I felt Renee tense up next to me. She took a long sip of her drink. You are smarter than the rest of them, she murmured. Listen, I can't be seen helping you. He pays my retainer, and it is a very large retainer, but I am tired. Leah, I am tired of cleaning up his messes. I am tired of watching him destroy people for sport. She stood up, smoothing her dress. As she did, she placed her empty glass on the small table between us. Underneath the glass was a folded cocktail napkin. Don't let him corner you, she said, loud enough for a passing waiter to hear. Lovely catching up. Leah, she walked away, disappearing into the crowd. I reached out and took the napkin. I unfolded it in my lap, shielded by the table. Scrawled in ballpoint pen were 3 lines. Harborline is registered in Delaware, but the operating agreement has a flaw. Clause 14B. Check the signature authority. He got sloppy. I stared at the note. My hands were shaking again. But this time, it wasn't from fear. It was from adrenaline. Renee Blake, the woman paid to protect Damien's secrets, had just handed me the key to the castle. Clause 14B. I didn't know what it was yet, but I knew one thing. Damien Vale wasn't invincible. He was a man who had cut corners, a man who had underestimated the women around him. He thought his mother-in-law was weak. He thought his fiancée was a doll. He thought his lawyer was a machine. And he thought I was a failure. He was wrong about all of us. I looked up. Across the room, Damien was tapping a spoon against his champagne glass. The sharp, high-pitched ting-ting-ting cut through the chatter. "Ladies and gentlemen," he called out, his voice booming with forced charisma, "if I could have your attention for a moment." The room went silent. The toast was beginning. I folded the napkin and tucked it into the hidden pocket of my dress. I stood up, let him make his speech, let him try to humiliate me. I was ready. The sound of silver striking crystal cut through the low hum of conversation like a bell in a quiet cathedral. Ting, ting, ting. It was a delicate sound, polite and refined, but the effect was immediate and total. The room, which had been a sea of shifting alliances and whispered deals, froze. 80 heads turned in unison toward the center of the ballroom. The waiters stopped pouring wine. The air conditioning seemed to hum louder in the sudden vacuum of human noise. Damien Vale stood by the fireplace, one hand resting casually on the marble mantelpiece, the other raising a flute of vintage champagne. He looked every inch the master of the universe. The lighting in the room had been dimmed slightly, leaving him bathed in a warm, golden glow that smoothed out the sharp edges of his ambition and left only the shine of his success. He smiled. It was his billboard smile, the one that graced the covers of business magazines under headlines like The New Titan or Visionary Capital. "My friends," Damien began, his voice rolling out rich and warm, perfectly pitched to reach the back corners of the room without shouting. "Thank you. Thank you all for being here tonight to celebrate not just a merger of families, but a merger of hearts." A soft ripple of appreciative laughter moved through the crowd. It was the kind of laughter that cost nothing but bought safety. "When I first met Sienna," Damien continued, turning his gaze to my sister, "I knew that my life was about to become infinitely more expensive." The crowd chuckled louder this time. Sienna smiled, but I saw the way her jaw muscles bunched. It was a joke he made often, reducing her to a luxury item, a line item on his balance sheet that he was happy to pay. He reached out and pulled her closer to him. She went willingly, pliable under his touch, her silver dress shimmering like the scales of a fish caught in a net. "But in all seriousness," Damien said, his voice dropping to a register of mock intimacy, "Sienna has brought a light into my life that I didn't know was missing. She has taught me that there is more to life than the closing bell of the stock market. She has given me Perspective. He paused for effect. He was good at this. He was a predator who had learned to mimic the behaviors of a warm-blooded human. And, of course, she brought me a new family, Damien said. His eyes left Sienna. They scanned the room, sliding over the faces of the wealthy and powerful, until they landed, with the precision of a laser designator, on me. I was standing near the pillar where I had retreated after Renee Blake left me. I had the cocktail napkin with the secret regarding Clause 14b burning a hole in my pocket, but my face was a mask of polite interest. "Leah," Damien said, saying my name like it was a punchline he had been saving up. "Our resident scholar." The heads turned again. All eyes were on me. I felt the weight of their judgment, heavy and suffocating. I didn't move. I didn't smile. I just held my glass of water and waited. "You know," Damien said to the room, keeping his eyes on me, "Leah is the brain of the Davis family, while Sienna was busy being the beauty. Leah was off in the frozen wastelands of Iceland, studying, what was it again? Leah? Ancient sheep farming laws?" The room erupted in laughter. It was cruel, sharp, and immediate. "Sagas, actually," I said, my voice calm, though my heart was hammering against my ribs. Right, Damien waved a hand dismissively. "Dead words from dead men. I have always admired that about you. Leah, the dedication to things that have absolutely no practical value in the modern world. It is quaint, really." He took a sip of his champagne, enjoying the audience. "But I have hope," he continued, and now the venom began to leak into his tone. Disguised as brotherly concern, "I have hope that this union, this family we are building, might help you find your way. Leah, maybe getting a taste of the real world, the world of commerce and actual stakes, will inspire you to leave the dusty books behind. We all want you to be more than just a footnote." The insult landed with a dull thud in the center of my chest. A footnote. It was a direct reference to what he had told Sienna, that I was a failure, a washout, a woman who couldn't hack it in the arena and had retreated to the shadows. The guests laughed again. They didn't know the history. They didn't know about the thesis or the Arctic Clarity Framework. To them, I was just the eccentric, underachieving sister of the trophy bride. And Damien was the benevolent billionaire offering me a hand up. I saw my mother, Corinne, standing near the front. She was laughing too. She was nodding, signaling to the room that it was okay to mock her daughter, that it was all in good fun. I tightened my grip on my glass until my knuckles turned white. Let him talk, I told myself. Let him dig. Damien was basking in the reaction. He looked triumphant, but then his gaze flickered. He looked past me, toward the shadows of the alcove where I had been standing 10 minutes ago. He saw Solveig Arneson. Solveig was not laughing. She was standing perfectly still, holding her mineral water, watching Damien with the cold, unblinking stare of a hanging judge. She had not joined in the applause. She had not smiled at his jokes. And most importantly, Damien realized with a jolt that I had been standing next to her before the toast began. I saw the calculation happen behind his eyes. He saw the proximity. He saw the potential threat. What did they talk about? Why isn't Solveig smiling? Did Leah say something? Fear flashed across his face, a microscopic tightening of the skin around his eyes, but it was instantly replaced by aggression. When a narcissist feels threatened, they don't retreat. They attack. He needed to reassert control. He needed to prove, right now, that he was the alpha in the room, and that I was nothing more than a prop. He needed to discredit me before I could become a liability. "But speaking of your unique talents, Leah," Damien said, his voice taking on a new, sharper edge, "we have distinguished guests from the north here tonight. The Arneson delegation," he gestured to Solveig's table. "And since you claim to be such an expert in their culture," he said, the word claim doing heavy lifting, "why don't we have a little demonstration, a little intellectual entertainment?" He stepped down from the raised hearth, moving into the center of the crowd. The guests parted for him, forming a circle. He was turning the party into a coliseum. "You speak Icelandic, don't you?" Damien asked, walking toward me. "Or at least, you study it." "I speak it," I said. "Wonderful," Damien beamed. "So do I. I have been taking lessons, immersion training, for business. Of course, unlike you, I learn languages to build the future, not to dig up the past." He stopped 5 feet from me. He was close enough that I could smell the alcohol on his breath beneath the mint. "Let us see if you can keep up," he said, and then he switched. It was standard, polite. The pronunciation was crisp, clearly rehearsed. He said in Icelandic, "Welcome to our party, Leah." The room murmured in appreciation. To them, this was a charming parlor trick. The billionaire and the academic, trading pleasantries in an exotic tongue. I replied simply, "Thank you." But Damien's smile widened, and his eyes went dead. He saw that I had responded. He saw that I wasn't backing down. So he decided to escalate. He decided to say the things he couldn't say in English, the things that would ruin his reputation if the Americans understood them. He believed I was a fraud. He believed my Icelandic was limited to textbooks and sagas. He believed he could insult me to my face, in front of 80 witnesses, and I would be too confused or too polite to stop him. He took a step closer, raising his voice so the back of the room could hear the poetry of his words. "You stand here like an ornament that nobody wanted," he said in Icelandic, his tone melodic, almost operatic. The guests smiled, nodding their heads to the rhythm of the speech. They thought he was reciting a verse. "Sienna is the star, but you are just the shadow that follows her, a dirty shadow," he continued in Icelandic, gesturing gracefully to my sister. I felt a cold shock run through me. It wasn't just the insult. It was the brazenness of it. He was calling me a dirty shadow in the middle of a black tie gala. And people were smiling at me as if he were toasting my beauty. I looked at Sienna. She was standing just outside the circle. She didn't speak the language, but she knew him. She saw the set of his jaw. She saw the way his eyes were gleaming with cruelty. Her hands were covering her mouth. She looked terrified. She knew he was hurting me, even if she didn't know the words. I looked back at Damien. I kept my face perfectly neutral. I didn't frown. I didn't flush. I looked at him with a mild, polite curiosity. This enraged him. He wanted a reaction. He wanted me to look confused. He wanted me to ask, "What does that mean?" So he could translate it into something condescendingly sweet for the crowd while smirking at me. My silence pushed him further. Then he turned to the crowd, switching briefly to English. "She is processing. It is a complex dialect. Give her a moment," he asked, laughing lightly. "Do you not understand me?" He turned back to me, and now he went for the throat. "You are a parasite," he said in Icelandic. The word hung in the air. Parasite. It was an ugly, guttural word. "You live off your sister. Your family would be on the street if I hadn't bought you. You know it. Your mother knows it," he went on, his voice dripping with disdain. My mother was beaming in the background, clapping her hands softly, oblivious to the fact that the man she worshipped was announcing he had purchased her like a piece of furniture. "You are nothing. You are a spare part. Nobody loves a spare part," Damien said, leaning in, his voice dropping to a whisper that was meant only for me in the front row. He straightened up, spreading his arms wide, beaming at the crowd. "To family!" he shouted in English. "To family!" The crowd roared back, raising their glasses. They cheered. They drank. They celebrated my humiliation because they thought it was a tribute. Damien looked at me. He was breathing hard, flushed with the thrill of his own cleverness. He had done it. He had said the quiet part out loud. He had vented his contempt for me and my family, and he had gotten a round of applause for it. He waited. He waited for me to lower my eyes. He waited for me to stutter a thank you. He waited for the submission that would confirm his dominance. The room fell silent again, waiting for my response. They expected a toast. They expected a sisterly speech. I looked at Solveig Arneson. She was the only one not drinking. She was watching me, her eyebrows raised slightly. She was waiting to see if the scalpel was sharp. I looked at Sienna, who looked like she was about to be sick, and then I looked at Damien. He thought he had won. He thought language was a barrier that protected him. He thought that because I was poor, because I was a failure, because I wore a dress from the rack, I was incapable of meeting him on this battlefield. He had just bet his entire social standing on the assumption that I was stupid. I took a slow step forward. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't look angry. I looked at him with the gentle, pitying expression of a teacher watching a student fail an exam they had cheated on. The silence stretched. It became heavy, uncomfortable. The smiles on the guests' faces began to falter. They sensed something was wrong. They sensed that the script had gone off the rails. I let the silence build until it was screaming, and then I cleared my throat. The silence that followed my throat clearing was heavy, expectant, and cruel. The room was waiting for a stutter. They were waiting for a tearful exit or a clumsy English apology that would confirm Damien's dominance. I looked Damien Vale in the eye. I did not blink. I did not smile. I let the air settle around us, letting the tension stretch until it was almost a physical vibration in the room. Then I spoke. "That is an interesting choice of words. Damien," I said in Icelandic. My voice was not loud. It did not need to be. It cut through the room with the clarity of a tuning fork struck in an empty hall. It was the Icelandic of the university lecture halls in Reykjavik, precise, melodic, and rolling with the specific rhythmic cadence that a foreigner simply cannot mimic after a few months of lessons. Damien's smile faltered. Just a fraction. A tiny crack in the porcelain. I took a step closer to him, invading the space he had claimed as his stage. "However, you made a mistake in the conjugation," I continued, keeping my eyes locked on his. I saw the confusion cloud his eyes. He didn't understand what I was saying. He had memorized insults, but he hadn't learned the language. He had a script, and I had just set fire to the pages. I turned slightly, addressing the table where Solveig Arneson and her delegation sat. They were leaning forward, their expressions shifting from polite boredom to sharp attention. Damien attempted to use the subjunctive mood to imply a hypothetical condition, I said, switching seamlessly to English for the benefit of the American guests. My voice cool and informative. But he used the indicative in Icelandic. That is the difference between stating a fact and telling a lie. It is a common mistake for tourists. It is less forgivable for someone claiming to do business at the highest level. A low murmur rippled through the room. I saw Solveig's lips twitch. It wasn't a smile, but it was close. Damien's face flushed a deep, ugly red. I was simplifying it," he stammered, his booming voice suddenly sounding thin. "For the audience." "Of course," I said, cutting him off with a nod. "But let us discuss your vocabulary. You use the word parasite." I let the harsh, guttural word hang in the air again. "You called me a parasite," I explained to the room. "Specifically, a creature that feeds on a host." Sienna gasped. The sound was audible in the silence. The guests, who had been laughing moments ago thinking it was a poem, now looked uncomfortable. They shifted in their bespoke suits, realizing they had been applauding an obscenity. I paused, letting the ancient sounds settle. Then I translated, my eyes never leaving his face. I said, stepping back into the Icelandic flow, my voice dropping an octave, becoming darker, more resonant. In the Gragas laws, which you pretend to know, a parasite is not the one who accepts help. It is the one who takes more than he gives. It is the entity that sucks the life out of the host until the host is dead. I looked pointedly at Sienna, then at my mother, and finally back at Damien. My family needed help 3 years ago. Yes, I said, my voice ringing out clearly. But a savior restores the host. A parasite owns it. Which one are you? Damien? The silence in the room was now absolute. It was the kind of silence usually reserved for car crashes or sudden deaths. Damien looked like he had been slapped. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. He had lost the rhythm. He had lost the control. He tried to laugh. It was a wet, desperate sound. This is a performance," he shouted, gesturing wildly at me. "Look at her. She practiced this. She memorized a few lines to try and embarrass me at my own engagement party. It is pathetic." He looked around the room, begging for validation. "She is an actress, a failed academic trying to sound smart." "I am not acting, Damien," I said calmly. I turned to the room, addressing the confused faces of the Chicago elite. "My name is Leah Davis. For the past 3 years, I have been a senior linguistic analyst for the Northbridge Language Lab. I specialize in the disambiguation of high-stakes international contracts." I walked toward the Arneson table. I stopped in front of Solveig. "The Arctic Clarity Framework," I said, looking her in the eyes. Section 4, Paragraph 2. The definition of force majeure in maritime law versus the definition in standard equity agreements. I wrote that distinction. I spent 6 months arguing with a panel of Swedish lawyers to ensure that the term reasonable delay could not be weaponized against smaller shipping firms. Solveig stood up. She did not do it quickly. She rose with the slow, terrifying gravity of an iceberg calving into the sea. She was tall, taller than Damien in her heels, and she did not look at him. She looked at me. "You wrote the distinction on force majeure?" she asked. Her voice was raspy, dry, and carried more authority than Damien's microphone ever could. "I did," I replied. "And I referenced the 1998 Oslo Accord as precedent." Solveig nodded slowly. Then, she turned her head. She looked at Damien. He was standing alone in the center of the room, sweating under the warm lights. "Damien," Solveig said, "how long have you been studying Icelandic?" It was a simple question, a casual question. But coming from her, it sounded like a deposition. Damien blinked, caught off guard. Well, as I said, I have been immersing myself. For the deal. For the respect of your culture. Solveig, I have a tutor. Top of the line." "A tutor," Solveig repeated flatly. "And did this tutor tell you that parasite is a term we use for vermin? For rats?" Damien paled. It can be used metaphorically." "It is used for things we exterminate," Solveig said. "Not for family." She didn't shout. She didn't have to. The rebuke was total. Damien looked around the room, his eyes wide and frantic. He saw the shift. He saw the senator looking at his shoes. He saw the tech mogul whispering to his wife. He saw the judgment. He was losing them. He was losing the narrative. "She is trying to confuse you," Damien snapped, his voice rising in pitch. "She is speaking gibberish. It is a trick. She probably learned those phrases off an app." He pointed a shaking finger at me. "Do not let her fool you. She is a fraud. She is just a translator." I looked at him. He was unraveling. The cool, calculated billionaire was gone, replaced by a playground bully who had been punched in the nose for the first time. "You think this is a trick?" I asked softly. I looked at the delegation sitting next to Solveig. There was a man I recognized from the guest list, a venture capitalist from Oslo, and next to him, a woman from Copenhagen. I turned to the man. "Sorry for the scene," I said in fluent Norwegian, my cadence tipping into the Oslo dialect. "But precision matters when we talk about ownership, doesn't it?" "I apologize for the scene. But precision is important when talking about ownership, isn't it?" The man's eyebrows shot up. He nodded, almost involuntarily. "Day, he murmured. "It is." I turned to the woman from Copenhagen, and the truth always comes out, even when dressed in borrowed feathers. I said in Icelandic and Danish, hitting the soft, guttural consonants that distinguish the language from its neighbors. The woman smiled, a genuine, sharp smile. I turned back to Damien. I switched back to English. "That was Norwegian and Danish," I said, "in case you wanted to update your flashcards." The room was silent. It was a vacuum. The air had been sucked out by the sheer, undeniable weight of competence. It wasn't just that I spoke the languages. It was that I wielded them. I had taken his weapon, his pretension, his intellect, his arrogance, and I had turned it against him. I had proven, in less than 2 minutes, that he was a tourist in a world where I was a citizen. Damien stood there, stripped naked. The tuxedo couldn't hide him. The money couldn't hide him. Everyone saw him for what he was, a man who used words he didn't understand to hurt a woman he thought couldn't fight back. He looked at Sienna. She was staring at him, her hands lowered from her mouth. Her eyes were wide, and for the first time all night, they weren't fearful, they were confused. She was looking at him like she was seeing a stranger. "Sienna," Damien said, his voice pleading. Tell them she is crazy." Sienna didn't move. She didn't speak. Damien turned back to me. The panic in his eyes was hardening into something else, something dangerous. Hate. Pure, unadulterated hate. He realized he couldn't win the intellectual argument. He realized he couldn't laugh it off. The stage was gone. The audience was hostile. He took a step toward me, his hands balled into fists at his sides. "You think you are clever," he hissed, low enough that only the people in the immediate circle could hear. "You think you can come into my house, drink my champagne, and humiliate me?" "I didn't humiliate you, Damien," I said, holding my ground. "You did that yourself when you opened your mouth." "Get out," he said. His voice shook with rage. "Get out of my house!" "Damien." His father, Gerald, stepped forward, putting a hand on his son's shoulder. "Calm down. This is a party." Damien shook him off violently. "No! She is trying to sabotage me. She is jealous. Look at her. She is a nobody." He was shouting now. The veneer was completely gone. The refined billionaire had vanished, leaving only the ugly, spoiled child who broke his toys when they didn't do what he wanted. "You are nothing!" Damien screamed at me, spittle flying from his lips. "I bought your house. I bought your life. You exist because I allow it." The room gasped. He had said it. He had admitted it. The debt, the control, the ownership. He froze. He realized, a second too late, what he had done. He had confessed to the very thing I had accused him of in Icelandic. He had confirmed the definition of parasite. I looked at him, and I felt a strange, cold sense of peace. "Thank you for the translation, Damien," I said quietly. "I think everyone understands the English perfectly." Damien looked around. He saw the faces of his investors, his partners, his peers. They were looking at him with a mixture of shock and disgust. He had broken the cardinal rule of their world. You can be a monster, but you must be a quiet one. You never show the stains on your record at dinner. He looked at Solveig. She was checking her watch. He looked at Sienna. She had taken a step away from him. He looked at me, and in his eyes, I saw the promise of retribution. He wasn't just embarrassed. He was destroyed. And a man like Damien Vale does not accept destruction. He redirects it. He lunged for the narrative. "She is lying," he yelled, pointing at me again, desperate to find an angle, any angle. "She is a spy. She is working for the competition. That is why she is here. That is why she is talking to Arneson." It was a pivot born of madness. But it was dangerous. Spy. Corporate espionage. In this room, that was a worse crime than a public scandal. But I wasn't afraid. I had the truth. I had the languages. And I had the napkin in my pocket. "I am not a spy. Damien," I said. "I am just the sister you forgot to buy." I turned my back on him. It was the ultimate insult. I dismissed him. But I knew it wasn't over. I could feel his rage radiating against my back like heat from an open oven. He wasn't going to let me walk away. He was going to try to burn the whole house down, and I was the one holding the matches. The transformation of Damien Vale was instantaneous and terrifying. One moment, he was the humiliated bully, stripped naked by a language he had tried to weaponize. The next, he was the ruthless CEO, spinning a disaster into a lawsuit. He realized in a split second that he could not win on intellect. He could not win on culture. So he decided to win on the one battlefield where he held all the ammunition: power. He didn't scream. He didn't throw a glass. Instead, he took a step back, his face hardening into a mask of professional concern. He looked at the crowd, then at me, then at the heavy velvet curtains of the alcove where I had been standing with Solveig. "Wait," he said, his voice dropping to a register of calculated realization. "Wait a minute." He pointed a finger at me. It wasn't a shaky finger anymore. It was steady. It was an accusation. "This isn't about language," he announced to the room. "This isn't about family tension. Look where she was standing." He gestured toward the alcove. "She was behind the curtain," Damien said, the narrative forming rapidly in his mind. "She was hiding in the alcove next to the library. I took a call there 5 minutes ago. A confidential call regarding the Arneson merger." A murmur went through the room. The atmosphere shifted from social awkwardness to legal tension. "You were listening," Damien accused, his eyes boring into mine. "You weren't correcting my grammar. Leah, you were stalling. You were creating a scene to cover up what you really are." He turned to the crowd, his arms spread wide. "She is not just a jealous sister," he declared. "She is a plant. She is a corporate spy." The words hung in the air like toxic smoke, in a room full of people whose fortunes relied on secrets, non-disclosure agreements, and insider information. Being called a spy was worse than being called a criminal. A criminal might hurt one person. A spy could wreck a stock price. "That is absurd," I said, though my voice sounded thinner against the sudden wall of hostility. "I am a translator. You are a freelance contractor with access to sensitive legal frameworks," Damien countered. Twisting the truth I had just given him. "You just admitted you work on international contracts. Who are you working for tonight? Which competitor paid you to sabotage this deal?" "Nobody paid me," I said. "I am here for my sister." "Are you?" Gerald Vale, Damien's father, stepped forward. He moved with the heavy, inevitable momentum of a tank. He didn't look at me. He looked at the room, validating his son's story with the weight of his seniority. "I saw her," Gerald said. His voice was gravel and authority. "Corinne and I both saw her. She was loitering near the service corridor for an hour. She refused to sit at her assigned table. She was watching the library entrance. It looked suspicious then. It looks criminal now." My mother, Corinne, stood next to him. She looked pale, her eyes darting between me and Damien. "Mom?" I asked. "You know that isn't true." Corinne didn't speak. She looked at Damien, who was watching her with an expression of cold expectation. He raised an eyebrow. It was a silent command. "Pick a side, right now." She was acting strange," my mother stammered, addressing the floor. "She was asking about money. She was asking about the debts. She was very agitated." It was betrayal, delivered with a whimper. My own mother was framing me to save herself, by painting me as desperate and money-hungry. She was giving Damien the motive he needed to sell his lie. "There you have it," Damien said, triumph returning to his face. "Desperate for money, asking about debts, eavesdropping on a merger call, and then launching a public attack on the CEO to devalue the negotiation position." He turned to the shadows near the entrance. "Security!" he barked. 2 men in dark suits materialized from the edges of the room. They weren't the doormen. These were the internal security. Thick-necked, dead-eyed men who handled problems that couldn't be solved with a check. "Escort Ms. Davis off the property," Damien ordered, "and detain her until we can get a police officer to confiscate her phone. I want to know who she is sending recordings to." The security guards moved toward me. Panic, cold and sharp, finally pierced my calm. This wasn't a game anymore. If I was dragged out of here, if I was booked for corporate espionage, my career was over. The Northbridge Language Lab would fire me before the handcuffs were even on. My security clearance would be revoked. I would be unhireable. Damien wasn't just kicking me out of a party. He was executing my future. My mother rushed forward, grabbing my arm. Her grip was painful, her fingernails digging into my skin. "Leah," she hissed, her voice trembling with hysteria. "Fix this. Apologize. Tell him you were drunk. Tell him you didn't mean it." "Mom, let go," I said, trying to pull away. "Do not walk away from this," she whispered, her eyes wide with terror. "If you leave like this, he will call the note. He will take the house. He will destroy us. Just say you are sorry. Say you are jealous. Be the villain. Leah. For us." I looked at her. I saw a woman so broken by fear that she was willing to sacrifice her daughter's entire life to keep a roof over her head. "I can't," I said. "You have to," she cried, tears finally spilling over. "Don't be selfish." The guards were 10 feet away. "Sienna!" I called out. My sister was standing between Damien and me. She looked like a statue made of ice that was beginning to crack. She looked at Damien, who was glowing with rage and power. She looked at me, being swarmed by security and clutched by our weeping mother. "Sienna, tell the truth," I said. "You know I'm not a spy. You know why I'm here." Sienna opened her mouth. Her eyes met mine. I saw the struggle there. I saw the part of her that remembered sharing a bunk bed with me. I saw the part of her that remembered us hiding in the pantry. But then she looked at Damien. She looked at the ring on her finger. She looked at the life she had bought at the cost of her spine. Sienna started. Her voice failed. "Sienna," Damien warned, his voice low and dangerous. "Don't get involved. She is using you." Sienna closed her mouth. She looked down. She took a half step back, toward Damien. She chose the silence. She chose the cage. I felt a hollow ache in my chest where my heart used to be. I was alone. The family I had come to save had just fed me to the wolves. I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. Renee Blake, the lawyer who had given me the napkin, stood up from her table. She didn't look at me. She picked up her clutch and her phone. She tapped the screen once, stopping a recording, and slipped quietly out the side door near the kitchen. She was gone. She had what she needed. I was on my own for the finale. The first security guard reached me. He put a hand on my shoulder. It was heavy and hard. "Ma'am," he said, "come with us without a scene." "Don't touch me," I said, shrugging him off. "I am leaving." "You are not leaving," Damien shouted. "You are being detained. I want that phone." "You will not touch her phone," a voice cut through the noise. It wasn't my voice. Solveig Arneson stepped out of the crowd. She moved into the space between me and the security guards. She didn't look like a 60-year-old woman. She looked like a blockade. "Mrs. Arneson," Damien said, his smile tight. "Please, this is a security matter. This woman is a fraud. We are protecting your interests as much as ours." "My interests are doing fine," Solveig said. She reached into her handbag. It was a small, beaded thing, completely impractical. But she reached into it with the confidence of a woman pulling out a weapon. She withdrew a thick, cream-colored envelope. "You called her a fraud," Solveig said, holding the envelope up. "You called her a failure. You called her a spy." "Because she is," Damien insisted. "She is a nobody who is trying to wreck a billion-dollar deal." "Damien," Solveig said. Her tone was almost bored. "Do you know why I didn't sign your letter of intent earlier?" Damien blinked. Because we were interrupted." "No," Solveig said. "I didn't sign it because my team ran a background check on the author of the compliance framework we are using. We wanted to hire her as a consultant." She tapped the envelope against her other hand. "I have the report here," she said. "I know exactly who Leah Davis is. I know her academic record. I know her publication history. And I know that she is the only reason your contract drafts make any sense at all." The room went silent again. The security guards hesitated, looking at Damien for instruction. Damien's face was losing color rapidly. He tried to laugh, but it came out as a cough. "Solveig," he said, trying to regain his charm, "you are being misled. These resume services, they can fabricate anything. She is a freelancer. She barely makes rent. Is that your measure of worth? Solveig asked. Rent? It is a measure of success, Damien yelled, losing his temper again. If she is so smart, why is she poor? Why is she wearing that dress? Why is she begging her sister for relevance? He pointed at me again. She is a failure, Damien screamed. I have the bank records. I own her family's debt because they couldn't manage a simple mortgage. She is genetic trash. Solveig, you are listening to the losing side. He was panting. He felt the ground slipping away, and he was trying to claw it back with sheer volume. He believed, deep in his bones, that his money made his version of reality the truth. He believed that because he had paid for the party, he got to decide who the hero was. Show me the proof, Damien demanded, reaching for the envelope. Give me that. It is probably faked. Solveig pulled the envelope back. This isn't for you, she said coldly. You have already shown us that you cannot read. She turned to me. She ignored the guards. She ignored the staring guests. She ignored the weeping mess that was my mother. Leah, Solveig said, I think it is time we clarify the situation. They are accusing you of being a spy because you know too much. But I think the problem is that they don't know enough. She held the envelope out to me. This contains the offer letter we prepared for you yesterday, Solveig said loud enough for the room to hear. We were going to mail it to your agency, but since I am here, and you are here, and your brother-in-law seems determined to destroy your reputation to save his own ego. She paused. I think you should open it. Read the title of the position we are offering. Damien lunged forward. Don't you dare! This is a private event. I will sue you. I will sue your whole firm. Sit down. Damien, Gerald Vale barked, grabbing his son's arm. The older man realized what was happening. He realized the tide had turned, but Damien was too far gone. No, Damien shouted. She is a spy. Arrest her. Take her phone. The guards looked at Damien, then at Solveig, then at the envelope. They didn't move. They were thugs. But they weren't suicidal. They knew power when they saw it. And right now, the power wasn't with the man screaming about genetic trash. I took the envelope from Solveig's hand. My fingers were numb. I could feel the eyes of every person in the room on me. Open it, Solveig commanded gently. I tore the seal. I pulled out the heavy, watermarked paper. I unfolded it. I read the text. My breath hitched in my throat. Damien was still shouting. It's fake! It's a prop! She's a nobody! I looked up from the paper. I looked at Damien. It says here, I said, my voice steady, that the Arneson Group would like to appoint me as the Director of Linguistic Compliance for the North American Division. I paused. And it mentions a signing bonus, I added. I looked at my mother. She had stopped crying. Her mouth was open. How much? Damien sneered. $5,000? 10? Enough to buy a new dress? $2 million, I read. The room gasped. It was a collective intake of breath that sucked the oxygen out of the space. That is a lie, Damien shrieked. That is impossible. It is an estimate of the value she brings, Solveig said calmly. Considering she is the only person who understands the code that protects our $4 billion investment, she looked at Damien. You see, Damien, Solveig said, you thought you were buying a company, but you were actually buying a liability, and Leah holds the key to fixing it, which makes her the most expensive person in this room. Damien stared at me. He stared at the paper. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. The narrative had flipped so hard it had given him whiplash. The failure he had mocked, the parasite he had tried to crush, was suddenly standing there holding a piece of paper that was worth more than his entire liquidity crisis. But he wasn't done. He couldn't be done. It doesn't matter, Damien hissed, his eyes narrowing into slits. You can offer her the moon, but she is still a criminal. She was spying. I saw her. My parents saw her, and I'm pressing charges. He pulled out his phone. I am calling the police commissioner, he said. I am going to have you dragged out of here in cuffs, Leah, and by the time I am done with you, that job offer will be rescinded because you will have a felony record." He looked at me with a terrifying grin. "Money wins," he whispered. "Money always wins." He tapped the screen. He was right. In his world, money usually won. He could bury me in legal fees. He could destroy my name in the press before I ever saw a dime of that bonus. He could make the lie true by sheer force of will. But he had forgotten one thing. He had forgotten the napkin in my pocket. He had forgotten that while he was busy watching the money, he had stopped watching the law. I reached into my pocket. I touched the cocktail napkin Renee Blake had given me. I didn't need the police. I didn't need the bonus. I just needed to say one sentence. "Go ahead, Damien," I said. "Call the police. But before you do, you might want to ask your lawyer about Clause 14B of the Harbor Line Operating Agreement." Damien's finger hovered over his phone screen. He froze. The color drained from his face so completely he looked like a corpse. "What did you say?" he whispered. "Clause 14B, I repeated. "The signature authority clause." I saw the recognition hit him. It wasn't anger anymore. It was terror. Pure, primal terror. He lowered the phone, and the room watched as the Titan of Chicago suddenly looked very, very small. The mention of Clause 14B hung in the air like the scent of ozone after a lightning strike. For a split second, Damien Vale looked like a man who had reached for a winning card only to find his hand empty. His mouth opened, but the threat died in his throat. He knew that I knew, and worse, he knew that Renee Blake, the architect of his legal fortress, must have given me the blueprints. But the night was not done with him, if my legal knowledge was a jab. Solveig Arneson was about to deliver the haymaker. She stepped forward, her heels clicking rhythmically on the hardwood floor. The sound was authoritative, the march of a general inspecting a surrendered army. She stopped beside me, forming a united front that Damien had never anticipated. The billionaire investor and the freelance translator, standing shoulder to shoulder against his ego. "You seem confused, Damien," Solveig said. Her voice was calm, but it carried the weight of a glacier. "You are wondering how a nobody like Leah Davis knows the intricacies of your holding company. You are wondering how she knows the language of my people. But the most embarrassing thing is not what she knows. It is what you do not know." Damien wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead. "I know enough," he snarled, though the volume had drained out of his voice. "I know business." "Do you?" Solveig asked. "Because you have spent the last 6 months begging me to bring the Arneson Group into your new venture. You have sent me binders full of contracts. You have bragged about your compliance standards. You told me that your new merger would be built on the gold standard of international law." "Yes," Damien said, straightening his tie, trying to find his footing. "The Arctic Clarity Framework. It is the most robust legal structure in the Northern Hemisphere. We adopted it fully. That is why you should sign." Solveig smiled. It was a terrifying expression. It was the smile of a wolf looking at a lamb that had voluntarily walked into the oven. "The Arctic Clarity Framework," she repeated. "It is indeed a masterpiece. It resolves the ambiguity between common law and Nordic civil law regarding liability. It is the only reason I even considered this meeting." She turned to me. She placed a hand on my shoulder. "Tell him, Leah." I looked at Damien. I looked at the man who had called me a parasite, a spare part, a failure. "I wrote it," I said. Damien blinked. "What?" "The Arctic Clarity Framework," I said, my voice steady. "I wrote the core syntax, specifically, the semantic bridge between the English definitions of liability and the Icelandic concept of legal responsibility. I spent 14 months in a basement office in Reykjavik, arguing with 3 law professors to make sure that framework worked. It was my thesis project. It was the work I thought I had abandoned." "That is a lie," Damien whispered, but he was looking at Solveig, and he saw the truth in her eyes. "It is not a lie," Solveig said. "It is the industry standard, and you, the great visionary, have been trying to sell me a deal based on a framework written by the very woman you just tried to have arrested for espionage." The room let out a collective gasp. It was the sound of a narrative shattering. The guests looked from me to Damien, connecting the dots. The failure sister was the architect of the deal. The genius billionaire was a fraud who didn't even know who built his own house. "You are trying to buy my money with her brain," Solveig said, her voice dripping with disdain. "You are standing here, drinking champagne, insulting the architect while living in her building." She reached into her purse again. She pulled out a fountain pen and the folded document Damien had been desperate for her to sign. The letter of intent. "I have a rule, Damien," Solveig said. "I do not do business with men who are smaller than their egos, and I certainly do not do business with men who are too stupid to know the value of the assets sitting right in front of them." She held the document up. "The Arneson Group is withdrawing from the merger," she announced. "Effective immediately." She tore the paper in half. The sound of the tearing paper was louder than a gunshot. Then she tore it again, and again. She let the pieces flutter to the floor like confetti at a funeral. "And I imagine," Solveig said, looking over at the table where the other Nordic investors sat, "that my colleagues will feel the same. The risk profile of this venture has just adjusted." The man from Oslo stood up. He didn't say a word. He just buttoned his jacket and nodded to Solveig. The woman from Copenhagen stood up too. They were walking out. The dominoes had started to fall. "No!" Damien shouted. He lunged forward, grabbing at the falling pieces of paper as if he could tape his $4 billion future back together. "You can't do this. We have a verbal agreement. I have leveraged the capital. If you walk away, the whole deal collapses." "Then let it collapse," Solveig said. "Better a collapsed deal than a compromised one." "Dad!" Damien spun around, looking for his father. "Do something! Tell them!" Gerald Vale was standing near the fireplace. His face was a shade of purple I had never seen on a human being. He wasn't looking at Solveig. He was looking at his son. Gerald walked over to Damien. He moved with a heavy, dangerous speed. When he reached him, he didn't offer support. "You fool!" Gerald hissed. It was loud enough for the first 3 rows to hear. "Dad, they are bluffing." "They are not bluffing!" Gerald roared, losing his composure completely. "You just insulted Solveig Arneson to her face. You just tried to arrest the author of the compliance framework. You arrogance just cost us the liquidity we needed to service the bridge loan." Gerald poked Damien in the chest, hard. "I told you to be charming," Gerald spat. "I told you to keep the family quiet. But you had to have your show. You had to have your little power trip. And now you have burned the future of this company because your ego couldn't handle a woman correcting your grammar." "I was showing strength," Damien argued, his voice cracking. "You showed incompetence," Gerald screamed. "And the market hates incompetence more than it hates crime," while the Vale men were tearing each other apart in the center of the room. I saw movement in the periphery. Corinne Vale, Damien's mother, was not watching her husband and son. She was a survivor, and she knew that when the ship is sinking, you don't argue with the captain. You grab the lifeboats. She was moving toward my mother. My mother was standing near the shrimp tower, shaking, her eyes wide with terror. She watched Corinne Vale approach like a rabbit watches a snake. I started to move, but I was too far away. Corinne Vale grabbed my mother's arm. She didn't do it gently. She dragged her into the small antechamber near the kitchen, the one used for staging the service. The door didn't close all the way. I moved closer. Ignoring the chaos in the center of the room, I needed to hear. "You fix this," I heard Corinne Vale hiss. Her voice was ice and steel. "You get your daughter under control, or so help me God. Janet." "I tried." My mother, Janet, sobbed. "I told her to apologize. She won't listen." "Then you make her listen," Corinne Vale threatened. "You remind her what is at stake. The debt, the house, your medical insurance. It is all tied to Harborline. If Damien goes down, he is taking you with him. He will call that note tomorrow morning. Do you understand? You will be on the street by noon. Please, my mother begged. Please, Corinne, we are family. We are not family, Corinne Vale said coldly. We are creditors and debtors, and right now, your asset is malfunctioning. Fix her, or we liquidate you. I froze. The cruelty was so naked, so transactional. There was no pretense of friendship anymore. The engagement, the party, the smiles, it was all just a foreclosure delay. They held my mother's life in their hands, and they were squeezing it to make me dance. I felt a presence beside me. I turned. It was Renee Blake. She had not left. She had just stepped into the shadows. She was holding her phone, the screen dark, but her thumb hovering over the interface. Did you get that? I whispered. I got all of it, Renee murmured, her eyes fixed on the partially open door where Corinne Vale was threatening my mother. The threat to call the note as retaliation, the explicit link between the marriage and the debt forbearance, it is extortion. Leah, textbook. She looked at me. He just signed his own social death warrant, and probably a criminal one too. Does it matter? I asked bitter. He still owns the debt. Not if the debt instrument was used as a tool for coercion, Renee said. That opens up a pathway for annulment, or at least a very long, very public lawsuit that a company in a liquidity crisis cannot afford. She slipped the phone into her pocket. I am done with them, Renee said quietly. I have spent 10 years cleaning up their messes. But threatening a widow? That is where I draw the line. I nodded. I felt a surge of strength. I wasn't alone. I had Solveig. I had Renee. And then, I looked at Sienna. She was standing alone in the middle of the room. The guests had backed away from the Vales, as if failure was contagious. Damien was still arguing with his father. Corinne Vale was emerging from the antechamber, smoothing her dress, looking like a viper that had just struck. Sienna was looking at Damien. For 3 years. She had looked at him with adoration. She had looked at him with gratitude. She had looked at him with fear. But now, she was looking at him with clarity. She saw him sweating. She saw him screaming at his father. She saw the spit flying from his mouth. She saw the man who had called her sister a parasite and her mother a debtor. The golden light of the chandelier didn't make him look like a prince anymore. It made him look like a frantic, drowning rat. She looked down at her hand. At the ring, it was a 10-carat diamond. It was heavy. It was beautiful. And for the first time, she realized it wasn't a gift. It was a price tag. He doesn't love me. I saw her whisper. Her lips barely moved, but I knew the words. He owns me. Damien broke away from his father. He was panting, his hair disheveled. He looked around the room, desperate to find a target for his rage, someone he could still hurt. He saw me. You, he screamed. You think you won? You think this is over? He marched toward me. The security guards didn't move to help him. They stepped back. I am going to bury you, Damien roared. I am going to call the Harbor Line note. Tomorrow morning, 30 days. Leah, you have 30 days to come up with $2 million, or I take the house. I take your mother's car. I take everything. He was frantic. He was confirming the extortion in front of 80 witnesses. I will make sure you never work in this industry again, he yelled. I will sue you for breach of confidentiality. I will tie you up in court until you starve. You are done. Do you hear me? You are dead. The room was silent. But it wasn't the silence of respect. It wasn't the silence of fear. It was the silence of judgment. The senator turned his back. The tech mogul checked his watch and signaled his wife. The guests were exchanging glances. They were calculating the risk. Damien Vale wasn't just a bully. He was unstable. He was screaming threats at a woman in the middle of a ballroom. He was admitting to financial coercion. He was threatening to destroy a family because a business deal went south. In their world, cruelty was acceptable. But loss of control was unforgivable. Damien stood there, chest heaving, waiting for the fear to return to my eyes. He wanted me to beg. He wanted my mother to scream, but I didn't beg. I looked at him with a profound, quiet sadness. "You are so loud, Damien," I said softly. "But nobody is listening to you anymore." He looked around. He saw the backs turning. He saw the investors walking toward the exit. He saw the waiters clearing the glasses. He was alone in the center of the room, and the silence was deafening. The silence that followed Damien's screaming threat was brittle, like a sheet of glass waiting for the final fracture. He stood in the center of the room, chest heaving, his eyes darting between me and the exits. Looking for an ally, he found none. The guests were studying the patterns on the rug or whispering behind their hands. But the final blow did not come from the investors. It did not come from the lawyers. It came from the woman standing in the shadow of his arm. Sienna moved. It was a small movement, but in the vacuum of the room, it drew every eye. She stepped out of the circle of Damien's reach. She did not look at him with fear anymore. She looked at him with the detached curiosity of someone observing a car wreck from a safe distance. She raised her left hand. With slow, deliberate movements, she gripped the platinum band on her ring finger, the diamond, a 10-carat rock that Damien had bragged about for months. Caught the light one last time. She slid it off. She didn't throw it. She didn't make a scene. She simply reached over and placed it on the nearest cocktail table. The ring hit the wood with a heavy, dull thud. "Sienna?" Damien breathed, his voice cracking. "What are you doing? Pick that up." Sienna looked at him. Her shoulders dropped, as if a 50-pound weight had been removed from her spine. "No," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it was her own. "I am done, Damien." "You can't be done," Damien laughed, a frantic, high-pitched sound. "We are getting married in 2 months. I saved your family. You owe me." "That is just it," Sienna said, stepping closer to me. "I thought I owed you my life. I thought I owed you my happiness, but I realized something tonight while you were screaming at my sister." She took a deep breath. "You didn't save us," she said. "You just bought us, and I am not for sale anymore." Damien lunged toward her, his hand outstretched to grab her arm, to pull her back into line, but before he could touch her, Gerald Vale stepped in. The older man grabbed his son by the shoulder, his grip ironclad. "Enough," Gerald hissed. "You have done enough damage." "She is leaving me," Damien shouted, struggling against his father's grip. "She is walking out with the asset. That ring is company property." "Let her go," Gerald commanded. He looked at the room, at the wreckage of his reputation. "Get him out of here, now." Security moved in. This time, they didn't come for me. They came for Damien. They flanked him, guiding him forcefully toward the side exit. Damien was still shouting threats, screaming about lawsuits and bankruptcy, but his voice grew fainter as they dragged him away. He looked small. He looked pathetic. He was a king who had been deposed by the very people he thought he ruled. The door clicked shut behind him. The party was effectively over. Sienna turned to me. Her eyes were filled with tears, but they were clear. She reached out and took my hand. "Leah," she whispered, "I have to tell you something. Something I should have told you 3 years ago." "It doesn't matter," I said, squeezing her hand. "We are out. That is what matters." "It does matter," she insisted. "When I called you in Reykjavik, when Dad died, it wasn't just because Mom was falling apart. It wasn't just about the money." She looked down at our joined hands. "I was already with Damien then," she confessed. "He had already started changing me, telling me what to wear, who to talk to. I felt like I was disappearing. I felt like I was drowning in warm milk. I called you because I knew you were the only person in the world who wouldn't be impressed by his money. I needed you to come home because I needed a witness. I needed someone to look at me and remember who I really was, so I wouldn't go crazy." I felt a sharp, tearing pain in my chest. For 3 years, I had carried the guilt of believing I had returned as a failure. I thought I was a burden, but the truth was, I had been a lifeline. "You didn't tell me," I said softly. "I couldn't," Sienna said. "He told me that if I complained, he would let the bank take the house. He made me choose between my freedom and Mom's safety. So I stayed, and I let him turn you into the villain because it was the only way to keep him from destroying you too." She looked at me, her face wet with tears. "I am so sorry. Leah, I stole your life to save mine." I pulled her into a hug. It was the first real hug we had shared in years. It smelled of expensive perfume and relief. "You didn't steal anything," I said into her hair. "We are taking it back, right now." I pulled away and looked at the room. The guests were filing out, eager to escape the blast radius of the scandal. Solveig Arneson was still standing there, waiting. Renee Blake was typing on her phone near the exit. I raised my voice one last time. "I want everyone to know," I said, my voice steady. "I did not win tonight because I speak Icelandic. I did not win because I know contract law. I won because I refused to be erased." I looked at my mother. She was standing by the kitchen door, alone. "We are leaving," I said. Renee Blake stepped forward. She handed me a business card with a personal number on the back. "Call me in the morning," she said. "I have the recording of his threat. Extortion invalidates the demand clause. Harborline Holdings won't be calling any notes. I will force them to the table. We will restructure the debt on your terms, not his. He won't want this tape played in open court." "Thank you, Renee," I said. "Don't thank me," she said, pulling on her coat. "Just make sure you finish that thesis. I hate wasted potential." Solveig Arneson walked up to us. She looked at Sienna, then at me. "The offer stands," she said. "The Arneson Maritime Institute is opening a branch in Boston next month. It is not Iceland. But the winters are similar. We need a director of compliance, and I believe the university there has an excellent Nordic studies program where you can defend your dissertation." "I will be there," I said. Solveig nodded. "Good. Do not be late. I hate tardiness." She turned and walked out, followed by her delegation. The room was empty now, save for the staff cleaning up the shattered glass and the 3 Davis women standing in the wreckage of a billionaire's ego. My mother walked over to us. She looked 10 years older than she had an hour ago. The mask of the society matron was gone, leaving behind a terrified, tired woman. "Leah," she started, her voice trembling. I didn't know what else to do. He promised to take care of us. He promised to own us." "Mom," I said, "there is a difference." "I was so afraid," she wept. "After your father died, the numbers, they were so big. I just wanted to be safe. I thought if I sacrificed a little bit of pride, we could keep the life we had. I didn't mean to sacrifice you." I looked at her. I wanted to forgive her instantly. I wanted to say it was okay. But it wasn't okay. She had watched Damien belittle me for years. She had asked me to apologize to a man who called me a parasite. "I know you were afraid," I said gently but firmly. "But you sold my future to buy your comfort. That is going to take a long time to fix." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I know. We are selling the house," I said. "The big house, the cars, the club memberships, all of it." "But where will we live?" she asked. "We will figure it out," I said. "But we are going to live somewhere we can afford, somewhere that belongs to us. No more billionaires, no more debts, no more pretending." Sienna took Mom's hand. "Leah is right. Mom, it is over. We are free." Mom looked at Sienna, then at me. She took a shuddering breath and nodded. Okay. We sell it all." We walked out of the Obsidian Club into the cold Chicago night. The wind hit my face, sharp and biting. It felt wonderful. It felt real. Behind us, the heavy oak door slammed shut, sealing Damien Vale and his broken empire inside. Epilogue. 3 months later. The office smelled of fresh paint and old paper. It was a corner office on the 4th floor of a brick building in Boston, overlooking the harbor, on the frosted glass of the door. Black letters read, "Leah Davis, Director of Linguistic Compliance. I sat at my desk, looking at the document in front of me. It was the final draft of the Arneson merger, revised and corrected. The language was precise, the terms were fair, it was perfect. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Sienna. Sold the last painting today. Got enough to cover the deposit on the new apartment. Mom is actually baking bread, like, with yeast. It's weird, but she seems happy. Also, I got the job at the gallery, starting Tuesday. I smiled. It hadn't been easy. The legal battle with Harborline had been brief but vicious. Renee Blake had been a shark, using the recording of Damien's threat to force a settlement that allowed us to pay off the principal of the debt without the crushing interest or penalties. We had sold the family estate in Chicago. We had sold the jewelry. We had sold the illusion. Mom was living in a 2-bedroom condo in the suburbs. She was learning how to budget. She was learning how to be a mother instead of a manager. It was a slow process, but for the first time in my life, when she looked at me, she actually saw me. Sienna had moved to Boston with me. She was renting a studio apartment downtown. She had cut her hair short. She wasn't wearing diamonds anymore. She was wearing paint-splattered jeans and working part-time at an art supply store while she built her portfolio. She looked tired, but she looked alive. And Damien? He was still rich. Men like him are always rich. But the Arneson deal falling through had triggered a vote of no confidence from his board. He had been removed as CEO of Vail Private Equity. He was currently spending his time in the Hamptons, fighting lawsuits from 3 different investor groups. He still had his money, but he had lost his audience. He had lost the ability to control the story. I looked up at the framed degree on my wall. I had re-enrolled in my doctoral program. My thesis defense was scheduled for the spring. The title of my dissertation was The Language of Power, Semantic Sovereignty in Medieval Icelandic Law. I picked up my pen and signed the bottom of the contract. Damien had tried to use language to humiliate me. He had tried to use debt to enslave my family. He had tried to write the story of my life as a tragedy of failure. But he forgot the most important rule of storytelling. Never give the pen to the person you are trying to erase. I capped my pen. I looked out the window at the gray Atlantic Ocean. I was Leah Davis. I was a sister. I was a scholar. And I was finally, completely, free. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed this journey of justice and reclaiming one's voice. Please let me know in the comments where you are tuning in from. I would love to connect with you and hear your thoughts on Leah and Sienna's victory. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing to the channel Lucy Revenge Stories, hitting the like button, and pressing the hype button to help this story reach even more people who might need a reminder that no one has the right to erase them.